Games need to end. Whether we're playing an all-out aggro pod where we all look to reduce our opponents to ash in the blink of an eye, or we're playing a slower control deck that looks to whittle everyone down via death by a thousand cuts, the game needs to be closed out. And with such high life totals and library sizes, there's a few ways at going about it. Commander games are about control. Whoever is in the driver's seat is responsible for making sure that they can close the game out and solidify themselves victorious before the other players can take that control away from them. This, interestingly enough, leads into two patterns. We can close the game quickly so as to make sure the other players don't dismantle our game plan, or we can take control even harder to make sure no one can dismantle our game plan. Both of these lead us down two very different avenues. Regardless of the deck, however, we need something to end the game. There are many decks out there that aren't winning as much as they'd like to, and sometimes the answer can be their lack of ability to close. With each deck, we need to envision our game plan and determine which of these two routes we'd like to take. It's easy for my Atali deck to close out since I can either transform and plow through board states or use combat tricks to get in for early damage. In that deck, I'd much rather remove players early on so there's less resources the deck has to deal with. But in something like my Yorian list, I make sure no one has a board state or ability to interact with my oppressive lock whilst I churn through my deck until I find my combo. Which leads me to my next point. Combos. They play a pivotal role in Commander as their efficiency allows for you to indiscriminately remove your players, regardless of the game's previous context. I'll note that some players don't like running combos as it can cheapen the experience, and I think that depending on the deck you're putting them in, they're right. This is where each deck has their own identity and needs to know what it's doing. It can cheapen an experience if someone's playing slivers with a big board state, all of a sudden pulls out an infinite which had nothing to do with the rest of their deck nor its game plan. However, if we're running a dedicated combo deck that spends all game trying to assemble a big engine that then blasts the table in a highly telegraphed way, people are less inclined to be upset since there's a perceived factor of this being earned. So how do we close? Clearly, we have decks, and we want our decks to do the things, but that doesn't always mean that we can end the game. It all starts with the vision. What is our deck's game plan for breaking through the wide array of board states it may come up against? And the answer won't be the same every time. For some decks, it can look like wiping the board every turn and killing people slowly with an indestructible 2-2. For others, it can look like building up a massive board state and giving it unblockable. Others might be using tutors to go find combo pieces and assembling an infinite combo. Regardless of what weapon we choose, we need to make sure it's focused. It's great to run cards that synergize with our game plan. We need to make sure we do to some extent, otherwise we'll never gain control to begin with. The issue arises when we've got too much synergy and not enough conversion. A great way to think about it would be if we had an entire deck of ramp and draw. We're definitely doing something. All game we're getting more and more advantage, but without any conversion, it doesn't mean anything. Recently, I've been trying a different version of deck building where I run individual closers. These cards don't require setup and, for the most part, are unconditional. This way, I don't need to be reliant on having other cards for my closers to do something, and it can free up slots for other ratios like draw, ramp, or removal. I'll admit that this won't be to everyone's liking. This has just been my experience. I run a few cards that can close on their own. All I need to do is make sure the rest of my deck can find these cards, have the mana to play them, and survive. Certain decks may want to seize control and tighten its grip turn after turn, in which case I don't need much to close, and can focus my resources on being more consistent at the first two, while others may want to wipe the board and throw something out that'll end it quickly. Regardless of my game plan, I have a way to win. What about synergy? I don't personally believe decks need to be synergistic to be effective. Hear me out. All they need is cohesion. They need their cards to work together and fill the roles they're intended for, whether that be giving us more mana, increasing our card quality, removing permanents, or closing the game. If we think about it, all these things are vegetables. Just because closing is flashier than everything else doesn't mean it's any less required. I've recently had the pleasure of helping someone with a Donal list. It had plenty of interaction, ramp, draw, and lands, but it lacked potency. There were a few points in the game where they seized control of the game but weren't able to do anything about it since they lacked ways to close. We later looked at the deck and realized there was an artifact sub-theme that wasn't helping the strategy either take control or convert it into a win, so it was cut, thus creating slots that can be used for the real cards that'll help close games in the future. All this to say that the deck didn't suck, far from it. It was able to keep drawing cards, making mana, and countering spells again and again. It was just a minor tweak that kept the deck from being scary but doing nothing to being scary and meaning it. Sometimes as deck builders, we can get a little too lost in the sauce and forget the basics of why we're building a deck to begin with. I'm hoping to act as a friendly reminder that sometimes decks can close one turn faster, other times decks need to hold control one turn longer, but sometimes neither will matter if there's no way to do anything with the control in the first place. By the way, I have a Discord. I'm starting a Togo tournament in there, and it's free to join, so if anyone wants to brew with others in the community, even if you don't want to play in pods, consider joining. As always, if there's someone you know who may benefit from watching this video, consider sharing it with them, so we can all become better deck builders together. This has been Togo's Rock, and I am out.